Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm senior literary agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bearce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nicki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
Welcome back to Wayward Writers. I'm excited for today's conversation, and it is for writers and non-writers who feel drawn to language not just as a tool, but as a way of being in the world. Our guest is Jeannine Ouellette, author, teacher, and creator of the Substack Writing in the Dark, which I love. And it's a vibrant community built around uncertainty, attention, and deep listening. Jeannine teaches writing as a spiritual practice, not in a dogmatic way, but as a lived human one, grounded in curiosity, vulnerability, and becoming. She often says that writing saved her life, and she teaches writing as if it might save someone else's. Today, we're talking about what it means to write in the dark, to slow language down, to trust not knowing, and to let writing change us, not just on the page, but in our lives. So, Nicki, will you tell us more about Jeannine, please?
I'd love to. Jeannine Ouellette's lyric memoir, The Part That Burns, was 2021 Kirkus Best Indie Book and a finalist for the Next Generation Indie Book Award in Women's Literature. Her best-selling cult favorite Substack, Writing in the Dark, explores writing is always part of a deeper, vaster conversation about what it means to pay attention as a pathway to becoming, how writing is a metaphor for life, and what it really means to be a human being. Because talking about how to write better without that larger philosophical kind of station is boring. Ouellette teaches writing through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop and at the University of Minnesota, where she also facilitates narrative health writing workshops for healthcare professionals and the public. Her craft book on writing, One Word at a Time, is forthcoming from Dale Books. Welcome, Jeannine. We're so excited to have you.
I am excited too. Thank you so much for having me here.
You really caught our eyes because we've been doing this for a few years now, and you have this beautiful, unique perspective on writing as almost like a way of life. And it just really captivated us. You've said something that when Heather was talking about that totally caught my eye is writing saved your life. So you teach writing as it might save yours and others people. Can you share with us what that means to you personally and practically?
Yes, I think I can. When I say writing saved my life, I should be clear that although I feel like I mean it literally, I don't mean it in the sense that I ever had what would be genuinely suicidal ideation, or it's not in that way that I mean it. I mean that I wouldn't have been able to become who I think we all are on a path of becoming, and there's some self that's already exists out there somewhere that we can find our way to. And I would not have found my way to that self that I felt was the real person who I'm meant to be without writing. And I think I can also say that I would not have found the fulfilling life, I guess, is connected to that selfhood. And that for me is grounded in childhood trauma, which I've written about, and the way in which writing gave me a pathway to take something that was impossible to understand when I was going through it and shape it into something that was something else and something more than that experience, and something that could do two things, both of which I think are important. And one is that it could live and exist outside of myself and be its own separate thing. And I think that's pretty profound, to be able to take lived experience and make it into something else. it's incredibly empowering, and I think really gets us in touch with our own agency. It's just a beautiful thing to be able to do. And also to be able to not just make it into something outside of myself, but also something what I strove for and what I hope I at least partially achieved is something that had some beauty in it. To take experiences that actually had no beauty, that were terrifying and harmful, and make them into something that, while not glossing over the terror or the harm, could still have beauty in it because of the language, because of that work of fashioning it into something that's more than the sum of its parts. So I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really beautiful. Yeah, it is. It's amazing and empowering in that it gives you control over the things in your life that you feel sometimes like you don't have any control over. I love that.
It's like you got to
What a-
create your narrative the way that you see it, and you are going to choose to believe it moving forward, which just empowers the reader to
Mhm.
create their own narrative of past trauma. So that's amazing that you were so vulnerable and brave to put those words on the page.
I think
Absolutely.
that when I talk to writers about this, one of the ways that I think about it, and this actually comes from André Aciman, so it's who I quote in the beginning of The Part That Burns. He said, "There is no past, there are only versions of the past." And he has this great essay that was in the New York Times. I think it was in 2010. So this is a long time ago now. But he talks about how when we write, we do just as you said, we create a version of the experience, and then that version takes over. It's like an overlay over what actually happens. So this beautiful version that's been made into something with language crowds out the other lived experience. And so I think of it like we don't change the facts of what happened, but he tells an anecdote about how his mother, who was caught in a difficult life and a difficult marriage, would constantly rearrange the furniture. And he likened it to, there was this one way of controlling and changing the situation. And he likened it to when we write something, it's the same. We get to arrange the furniture of what happened. We get to decorate the room and decide how it appears. So we're not fundamentally changing the truth of it, but we are in charge of the presentation. And that is empowering.
Absolutely. That's a great illustration.
That is. It's really easy to understand that way.
Mm-hmm.
When people hear writing as a spiritual path, some people seem to really gravitate toward that, and others tend to kind of step away. And so, how do you define spirituality in the context of the presentation that you have?
It's interesting because I do understand that the idea of like anything being spiritual can be polarizing. For me, I just more think of it as not even necessarily a spiritual practice, but again, harkening back to what I said at the beginning, this path of becoming. Like when we write, and when we write, especially through this lens of attention to the exterior world and cultivating this practice, it is inevitably, it cannot not, this double negative here, it cannot not intersect with how we live our life and who we become. And so that's how I see it. So, well, I'm not religious. I didn't grow up religious. I don't have any formal affiliation with any church or other place of worship or spiritual practice. But I do believe that we're sentient beings and we have these deep capacities for love, forgiveness, um, to do good in the world. And those, no matter how you categorize those capacities, along with language and imagination, are these deeply human capacities. I won't say that they're solely human, especially like the love part, animals can love and all of that. But the ability to put that to language in the complex way that human beings can, that is unique to us. And so I think that there's no way that you can, write as this kind of practice the way that I see it and not have that like be a part of your path to becoming.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
So your Substack's called Writing in the Dark, which Not only is it catchy, but I feel like any writer can identify that feeling, at least at some point in their journey. But what does it mean to you? And why is uncertainty such a powerful creative condition?
Love those questions a lot. And I'll tell you very briefly that the name Writing in the Dark, which I love too, so thank you for that. I chose it so fast. When the pandemic came down in 2020 and the country shut down, I think it was like on March 14th anyway, where I live in Minnesota, the governor shut everything down. And I, like everyone, was panicked. And part of what I was panicked about was that as a writer, and a teacher who a large part of my livelihood came from workshops and retreats and classes, and that was like all wiped off. My whole calendar disappeared. So I flew into like mode, and I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I already knew how to teach on Zoom. I had this superpower because I had started teaching on Zoom in 2017 for other reasons. And I'm very non-techie. So I was like, oh my God, I know how to do this thing. And I'm going to offer a workshop on Zoom, and I'm just going to make it like, wow, we're all really struggling. How can we maintain our creative practice during this terrifying, uncertain time? So I called it Writing in the Dark. It just came to me. I was like, oh, Writing in the Dark. And it meant the same thing. It came from that place, but it really worked for me because it's also tied to this idea of we're always writing from a place of uncertainty. As artists, we're always working from a place of uncertainty, this unstable ground, because if we're not, then we're not really creating. We might be transcribing or recording, but we're not really creating unless we're engaging with that state of uncertainty and ever increasing our tolerance for it, which comes directly from John Keats, who is the romantic poet who coined the term negative capability, which is, for me, kind of the guiding star. That really is the realm of artists, is to to be able to not just tolerate, but even embrace that state of unknowing. We have to work for it because for survival reasons, we're wired against it. So we need and want certainty, and that is human. And it's for our own good and for our own survival. So we have to actually actively work to put ourselves into that state of uncertainty in our art. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think a lot of times that's why people leave the craft and their art, because the uncertainty it can be smothering if you can't channel it in a positive way.
Or let go enough to even get there.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you can't let go enough to get there, like unless you're just writing, again, there are all kinds of different ways to write, and not all writing is creative. But if we're limiting it to creative writing, like you're going to, I think, ultimately feel a huge frustration and burnout with this, like, because I think of it like there's a wall between us and the work. And I think a lot of writers and artists talk about this, and a big 80% of it is like getting through that wall. And then once you're on the other side of it, whether it's in a session where you're trying to write, or if it's the project that you had to get through the wall, then you're in it, and you're in that realm of creatively engaging with the project. But until then, when you're on the outside of the wall, you're going to encounter a lot of friction and frustration, and which is a natural part of the process. But without the tools to engage with that uncertainty and get through to the other side, I think it must be very discouraging, and especially if you don't know. So like for a lot of beginning writers, or maybe writers who don't have mentorship or access to or ways to engage with the literary community and other people going through the same thing and working in the same way, think that it's them. They're doing it wrong. There's something wrong with them. And I encounter that when I work with writers individually. And it's like, no, actually, that's a part of the process. It feels that way. And here are like 6 tools you can use to help break that, make that wall more permeable.
It reminds me of runner's block. I'm a runner and was in high school and in college. And like when you hit that wall, it's going to happen no matter what you do to prepare. It's like your body betrays you sometimes. And it's like this, that is part of the process. But we almost forget, don't we? We go to
Mhm.
start a new project and then uncertainty creeps in. We're like, what is this? It's a new friend. And it might look different and it might feel different, but it's still the same thing, which is why community, like you said, is just so important that we can remind each other, no, you're good.
Yeah. Yes.
You've made it to uncertainty. That's a process. Like,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Exactly. I love the running analogy too, because I don't anymore, but I used to run. And that, like, when you hit that, I never ran more than 13 point whatever miles because I didn't do a full marathon, but far enough that you can hit that wall. And then you have to, like, you can, like, when you're fighting it, it's really hard. But when you can just kind of like surrender to it, that feeling of like just letting go and surrendering. And then all of a sudden, whether it's a mile later or whatever, you feel like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not panicking anymore. And I think with the writing, it is like that. And I think that the uncertainty, the way I teach it, is that it's a gift. That's what we're going for. So like you said, it's like, oh, great. And so when we can learn to like actually embrace it and welcome it, of course it's still uncomfortable, but to understand that it's actually the whole point. And now we're in that creative mode. Now we're not just dialing it in or doing what we did before. Then it can feel at least good in addition to the discomfort of uncertainty.
Agreed.
When I first saw I don't run, by the way, so I couldn't engage in that.
I don't anymore either.
When I first saw your title, Writing in the Dark, one of the reasons I loved it and I think I connected with it so quickly is because for me, I much prefer editing because there's something already there. And it is easier because you don't have to be in that place of vulnerability or not that you never do, but it's not the same as drafting or being in that creative process. And I remember distinctly many times when I have really gotten into the flow of just accepting that I'm going to take whatever comes when I'm drafting, and I just draft and draft, and I actually have found myself with my eyes closed while I'm drafting because I'm just so immersed in the world that I'm writing, and I'm just part of it. I'm part of the writing, right? I'm like part of the world, and I'm part of everything that's being created, and I think it's such an immersive and amazing experience when you get to that point. So I guess where I'm going with this is that one of the things that you talk about is that, maybe not in these exact words, but that language is like this living force. And I have felt that when I'm drafting. And you talk about the idea of language, waking language up, and that there's also sleeping language. So can you tell us a little bit about what sleeping language looks like and how writers can recognize it in their work?
Yeah. That's one of my sweet spots. But I love what you said about even finding yourself closing your eyes. Like it's just this drafting. I hadn't heard this term until the last couple of years, but draft zero, that idea of just letting yourself be totally free and just working with the material and not having expectations of it or not needing to know what it is even, or it's so important to allow ourselves that. And I call that the morning of writing because that's the creative part. And then the afternoon of writing is where it's revision and editing, and it's the more intellectual, structured. And I think that most writers are more comfortable in one or the other space. And so it's a good thing to know about ourselves. Okay, where do I feel more at home? Because then we need to work on the other side. Like we need to like really help ourselves get more fluent in the morning or the afternoon, depending. But with regard to waking language up, like I just taught a session yesterday on defamiliarization. And I think in poetry, it's often referred to as estrangement, which I think is really interesting. That is a big buzzword culturally in families right now. But when we think about estrangement of language, like to make strange, is so powerful. And like language is alive, actually. Once it's no longer alive, then it's a dead language, right? Because it's not being used anymore. It's not being spoken. It's not changing. It's not growing. It's not elastic. It's not interactive.
Mhm.
And when a language is living, it's working on us as much as we're working on it. And the meaning is in between. And so to me, a live language is when we take those extra steps to care deeply, not just about what is said, but how it's said, and looking at,
Mhm.
is that language awake and alive and going to be able to engage a reader in a way that feels awake and alive to them. And so sleepy language, I think of as what comes automatically. So it's just
Mhm.
because I often say that language writers are actually magicians, because our art form, we have this one very blunt, tired tool. And so, like musicians, my husband and I just saw Brandy Carlisle here in LA, and like, what an experience to watch that performance and just all the different pieces of it, all the tools that go into the experience that we have as a listener is amazing. But with writing, or we think of visual art or dance or theater, all the different tools, but with writing, we get words. And words are this really worn out tool. It's not a very artistic medium. It's our grocery list, our email, our work correspondence. And so in order to use it creatively, in order to use language creatively, does require going into a different space, like a different kind of engagement with it, and trying really hard to get under, like beneath and beyond that automatic way that we use language. And I think that this is becoming more and more true in the digital age, because I think we use words and written words more than ever before. The constancy with which we are using language all day long, every day. So a lot of that waking it up is defamiliarizing and like really getting in there. And sometimes it's just the smallest tweak, but to say, okay, I said it this way, but what if I just removed the verb, or like just throwing out a random example, or like I like to revise for imagery and look at the images and really identify any of the images that are just like really super familiar, and say, okay, there's probably a new way to depict that. And it's not, in my way of writing and teaching and thinking about language, it's not like looking for a fancier word or a newer, more original word. It's looking often for a more precise and specific way to say
Mhm.
something that drills down a little bit deeper than the way that it came out automatically.
I love that. I'm always saying that to people. Could you
Mhm.
be more specific with this word?
Exactly. And then, and you talked about life, right? And if we are doing that in our writing and thinking about this specificity of language, one time we talked about what kids say to their parents before we turned on the recording. And my kids have also said to me, can you imagine being married to mom? Because of many things, I'm sure. But this idea of like, thanks, I appreciate I think about that sometimes. Can you imagine being married to mom? But anyway, I think they meant it as a compliment, but also,
Yeah.
but the idea of that hyper specificity of language, it really, as you practice it over and over again and you live in it, you just start to really look more closely and listen more deeply,
Mhm.
think more deeply,
Mhm.
and be more awake in your own life. When you're thinking more clearly and deeply about how to put this sentence together, and not, again, I think it's important to distinguish. It's not about language when you're coming at it from the angle of, how can I make this more precise? Like, how can I tweak this so that it's more alive and more precise? Yeah,
Mhm.
it changes your relationship with your life and how you hear other people too. Your whole way of communicating shifts.
This
Mhm.
made me think of just how, as creatives, no matter what our medium is, we're a quirky, unique
Mhm.
bunch. But when you talk about just anything in life, even what are your favorite things or how would you respond in this situation? I feel like creatives generally know how to express and define their wants or what they're thinking, or
Mhm.
because they have to do that in their writing. And I feel like sometimes when I'm asking family members or friends who are not writers, whatever it is, you know what I mean? And they're like, I don't know, I've never really thought about that, or I don't really know what I like. And not that it's mutually exclusive, but I think sometimes we are, especially as writers creatively, we're always digging deeper, whether it's like characters' motivations or whatever. So in turn, we do it with ourselves. And
There
like
you
you said, it applies to our life. And sometimes you sit there and you think, we're so used to doing it
go.
that
Mhm.
have you never asked yourself that? And maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's just people don't know how to articulate it. If you're not in the word business, you know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like, I
right,
don't
I
know. It's
do.
just kind of fascinating.
And it's so we are shaped by language. We know this. Human beings are shaped by language. We shape it, it shapes us. So having an awareness of how that works, I think the study of narrative and narrative structure and is so empowering, like you said, for living. Because if you think about something like, okay, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, doesn't matter. You have a character and you're trying to show their emotion without saying she was sad or I was sad or whatever. And you're figuring out whether that's through what the character does or doesn't do, or maybe you're zooming the camera out. I like to think of it as like to a something in the exterior world that is intersecting with this emotional inner world and will create that experience for the reader, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just as one example, or what you said something that made me think of the flawed narrator. When we think of ourselves on the page, being sure to, okay, how can I make sure that I'm also highlighting my own fallibility and culpability? And when you're thinking like that with narrative, um, obviously, then you are thinking like that in life. You can't help but look at situations and think, oh, this is so interesting. I remember, again, back to my adult kids up at our cabin a couple of summers ago, I got into this topic because I was writing about it for Substack, Writing in the Dark. And this idea of there's the three basic story structures: man against the world, man against himself. And my son got super, super interested, and he's like, Mom, I think most stories are in real life are probably man against himself, right? And I was like, yeah, I think so. And just even that, having that understanding that so often the battle we're fighting in life, I'm saying, isn't really with whatever this external thing or entity is. It's so often something we're working out within ourselves. And so having that constant curious relationship to language and story and how what's not said, the power of what's not said, really start to understand the power of what's not said in writing, you become so much more aware of the power of what's not said in life and what's so much meaning is held in those white spaces. And yeah, it's so what you said is just really hits me because it's so true. It's so true. And I get it. I get why people who aren't, like you said, in the word business wouldn't necessarily be thinking about things. But when you, last thing, and I'll stop going on and on, but the idea of
Oh,
like,
no, this is great. This is why we're
okay,
here.
okay. Well, this idea of desire drives plot, right? The character has to want something, and you have to understand why they want it. You, as the writer, need to understand, even if it's memoir, again, this is really important. Why does the protagonist want what they want, even if it's you? What are the misbeliefs getting in their way? What's at stake? Engaging with all that over and over again makes you so aware in your life. Like you said, what do I want and why do I want it? And is it really what I want, or what are the misbeliefs getting in my way? And what is at stake? And even that last one for me, just the instantaneous ability to when an emotion comes up, to be able to see from a distance, but what's really at stake here? And often it's not much, is just so powerful. And
yeah, it's enlightening though to be able to ask yourself that, or anyone, and actually be able to answer it, because that means we spend time in therapy getting to that. You know what I mean? The what's at stake, and does it really matter, or have we made it into this monster when it's not? You know,
and it's not, because that's a man or woman against themselves situation, right? Where we're working against our own best interest. And you mentioned therapy, and it's like, there is, I think, no field closer to psychology than writing. You can't really be the best writer you can be without engaging with these ideas, which are very psychological. And I always, for the last 10 or 15 years, when I've been really seriously writing and teaching writing, I was been writing and publishing for a long time, but creative writing, when I finally made the leap, quit my full-time teaching job and was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I've been more and more aware, and say all the time, if I hadn't been a writer, I probably would have ended up as a psychologist, or I would have been in that field. Because
I'm with you.
Right?
I'm with you on that. Absolutely. That's why I love psychological thrillers. Like, my family and my adult children are like, should we be concerned you're going to kill us or something? And I'm like, no, but I would shut your door at night. But just the why, what makes people decide to do that thing, and why? It is so fascinating. So fascinating.
The deep curiosity about people, situations, how to convey those situations, and ultimately about ourselves. That deep curiosity and willingness and drive to keep re-examining ourselves. Because another thing I like to say is that we're not, and this has been like since I remember I said it first when I was teaching 7th grade. I don't know how it came about, but we're human beings, not human bens. We're constantly evolving and developing and changing. We're not static. And so that constant curiosity about, wait a minute, now who am I? Or what's changing? Or why am I responding this way and I didn't used to? My husband and I were talking in the car on the way out here to California, and this idea of the unexamined life. It was Aristotle who said the unexamined life is not living. And this idea, and then there's something like the phrase is know thyself, and that used to mean, it originally was know your limitations. And I thought that was so interesting because that's just, it changes everything to be able to look inside and engage with that in this really meaningful, curious way. And it changes how you interact with other people for the better, and therefore changes how you interact with the world and how you experience the world. And so that's what I mean by writing. I think it can save our lives. It can radically transform our lives if we're engaging with it in this really active, curious way.
I love the idea of being self-aware, and I also think that when we are understanding motivations and why people do what they do, I know in my own life, it has helped me to actively try and understand other people and why they've done the things they've done, even when it's harmed me, allowed me to forgive because I understood why they could do that or think that or make that decision. Yeah. It really does change. It really does change us.
It really does. It does, because again, like you said, if we have to do that for our characters, and we do, otherwise we're writing stock villains and good guys and bad guys, which doesn't work, isn't interesting. So we have to do this for both fiction and nonfiction, like really get curious about motivations. George Saunders talks about this really beautifully. And that makes us into more compassionate people, because we're able and willing to approach situations, people, problems, and, like you said, harms from that perspective, and maybe not instantly in the moment that we're being harmed,
Absolutely. 100%.
Ultimately, as we're processing and examining as we do with those difficult experiences. we just do it differently, because you can't do that over and over again on the page in your stories in these imagined worlds. Like you were saying, it becomes so real. It's realer than the real world when we're really on the other
Yeah.
side of the wall and we're in that
Mhm.
story, and it's that world is so vivid and so real. You can't do that and then not carry that over into your life. That's
Yeah.
not possible.
And to me,
Yeah.
that seems like that's part of the spiritual experience of
Mhm.
writing, is when
Exactly.
you're on the other side
Exactly.
and you can't really describe it. It is so all encompassing that until you feel it, like that's
Mhm.
part of the draw of
Mhm.
it, because you want to get to that other side because it's such an empowering, amazing feeling.
And it's
Yeah.
pretty transcendent, right? Like when you are
Absolutely.
really in it and it's become realer than real, there's something that, this is a little bit esoteric, but I believe it. It's like there's the story that wants to be told, this shape that already is out there, it exists in a different plane. And then there's us, and there's the story that we want to tell or we think we want to tell. And the story that's going to emerge ultimately is somewhere in between, right? Because we're
Mhm.
becoming a sort of a conduit for that shape that already exists. My youngest adult child teaches yoga, and I'm a trained yoga teacher too. And they always
Cool.
say shape is always there. Like when you're trying, always call it shapes, not poses. And you're trying to make this shape, and that the shape is already there. We're just allowing ourselves to fill that shape. The shape is there in space, in the space around us. And I think story is like that too. And you feel it when you're in it. And it feels magic. It feels amazing. It feels different than anything else. And I know that visual artists feel, I know that all artists feel that same thing when they get it through the wall and they're really making something, creating something, and it surprises you because you weren't expecting it to be what it's becoming.
Mhm.
There's all these ways.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, this is what it's going to be. Okay, and then you renegotiate with what you had thought you were going to do with what's actually happening on the page. Then it's alive. Then you're really in it, and it's just this incredible feeling. But back to writing saving our lives, isn't that what we're doing in the lives we're living? Because our life, the life that we're living, is in itself an act of creativity. We are
Mhm.
creating our own life, and we're negotiating with external constraints and circumstances in order to do that, which requires tremendous creativity. And when we're able to enter into that work with this sense of negative capability, I don't really know, and this openness and this sense of discovery and ability to pivot, the ability to reimagine, how different of a way to live a life is that than seeing something that happens that may be unexpected and difficult. And it does feel that way in the moment, of course, because we're human, but the ability to reimagine, and suddenly the Chinese proverb, is it a good thing or a bad thing? The son gets called off to war, and that's a bad thing, but then he breaks his leg, and that's a good thing because he doesn't have to go to war, but then something happens with the horse. I can't recite the whole proverb, but the point
Yeah,
of it,
yeah.
that thing, we only can understand things in hindsight, and we don't know, in the moment. And so the big part of it is, all the wisdom gurus say it's not what happens, it's how we respond to it. And obviously, I think there's limitations to that. Like, I'm from Minneapolis, and when people are being kidnapped and taken away from their families and things, but
Yeah.
for ordinary everyday things that happen to us, I think there is a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, it makes us really agile and able to adapt. I think the more we're able to, like you say, reimagine our lives, or I know I had to do that when my husband and I decided to become essentially homeless and live in an RV. It was a huge thing that we had to do, wrap our minds around. And are we really going to be all right? Is it okay to not have a house? And how do you redefine yourself when you used to be the person who lived in that house,
Yeah.
and you were that person's mom, and you were that person's husband, and you were
Mhm.
like, everyone around you defined you in certain ways, and then suddenly you weren't that thing anymore. And anyway, it's interesting. I think it's incredible to know that it is possible for us to do that and that writing can empower us to do that too. It's very fun. I love it.
And just listening to you talk about what happens when we're working on a story and we realize, oh, this isn't really what it's about, or oh, this person, this character isn't actually, no, they're not actually the way I was imagining. And this can happen. It really does happen in nonfiction. It's, oh, this isn't actually about what I thought it was. And the way that I saw myself in this isn't actually who I was then. I have to revisit that. So that does prepare us for moments like what you're talking about, for major reinvention in real life, because we have that muscle memory. We're doing it in these ways that feel realer than real because we've made this world that is realer than real. So it's transferable skill.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
It's working overtime, double time.
Writing in the dark, and you may have said this, or maybe I picked it up somewhere. I can't remember where I found this, but it's defined as a slow language movement. And slowness, honestly, in today's world is somewhat of a, I don't know, it feels like it doesn't exist almost at all anymore. Can you elaborate on the idea of how slow language is essential in, like, the essential nature of slow language in creating art?
For me, what that means is this willingness to be immersed in language for language's sake and to find pleasure and joy and transformation in just the act itself of getting as close up to language as we can, closing the gap between experience and the way that language can depict that experience, which there's always going to be a gap, right? So getting that as to be as narrow as possible. I think that there's writing to finish something, and if we're working writers, we have to do that too. That's a part of it. But I like to teach sort of anti-capitalist writing that it's okay to and necessary to embrace the process, to put process over product, because if we don't, then we're probably never going to get to anything really good. We have to embrace the process, which includes making messes, being playful and experimental, being really willing to make something that doesn't work. And that's subjective, but that isn't something that we can use for what we thought we might be able to use it for, to do experimental things that may produce what my mentor calls absolute rubbish. And because as long as we're devoted to always making something usable, right? Then I think that's capitalist inculcation, because we're telling ourselves anything else is a waste of time. I have to be able to do something with this. But,
So true. So true.
right? Musicians play scales, basketball players do layups or whatever. And I'm always using examples from things I don't know anything about.
Yeah, what do we do, Jeannine? What is our layup? Tell me.
Our layup is like to be willing to just get in there and make a mess and be like genuinely practice being okay with. So when I'm teaching classes, I give writing exercises, and I'm really always passionate to say this is an exercise. If it becomes something more than that, awesome. It might. And there's always this contradiction. A lot of people in the workshop do end up publishing work that started as one of these exercises. That's great. Love to celebrate that. But also, if that's what if that's what you're holding tightly to before you even say the first word, it will limit what can happen on the page, because it will make you stay on the safe side. You're not going to take the same risks. You're not going to be willing to, let it go and see what happens if you're actually not willing to let it be nonsense and something that you look at so much. I think it's just really important. And I think that's part of what I mean by slow language, is just being willing to stay on the process side and let that be valuable for its own sake. Because it's thrilling, really, to engage with language in that way, because language is so powerful. So to recognize that even just that experience is changing us, and it's changing our writing. And it doesn't matter if we can do something with it afterward. What does the musician do with the scales that they practiced for a half an hour? They
That's where a lot Our joy, probably, like when we talk about getting back to the joy of writing, one of the many joys is the play, right?
Yeah.
The playing in the puddles and getting dirty and sometimes bleeding and have to time out for a band-aid because we played so hard. That's where the joy, the like wild abandonment to just write.
Yes, and to be in it. And when kids play, I used to be an elementary teacher and I have kids. And when they play, it's like this. It's like, and now we're going to go to the castle, except let's not have it be a castle anymore. Now it's going to be the school. And they can just morph and adapt. And when the game dissolves, and it's not like, oh, that was a waste of time. We never should have made up that game. It's like, no, now the game turned into something else entirely. And that's joyful. It's joyful. And we know it when we feel it. And I always tell my writers, when we are in class and have given an exercise the week before, we start with talking about, so what did that feel like writing to that exercise? What did it feel like? And I think it's really important to talk about process, because if we are going to be serious about process matters, then we should be curious about it and talk about it. And whenever anyone says, oh, it was like this and it was like this, but then all of a sudden, and it was just so fun. And I was like, remember that feeling. Put that into muscle memory, because that's what we're going for. We're not going to get it every time, but if you don't know what it feels like, then we can't get there. So remember that, because that's what it feels like to really be in the zone of creative writing. And that's what slow writing is for me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.